Helena's main academic background is also in psychology. At the University Hospital of Psychiatry in Zurich, Helena conducted a clinical internship and joined the Department of Neuropsychopharmacology and Brain Imaging to study the effects of psychedelics and meditation. As a doctoral student, she's running an EEG study on out-of-body experiences and mood, works on the Global Ayahuasca project, and investigates pharmahuasca in interventional studies focusing on empathy and prosociality. Her talk for today will be on how psychedelics could help shape a therapeutic paradigm. So if you're here, Helena, then the stage is yours, and looking forward to your talk. You have to unmute yourself.
That's true. Thank you very much for the invitation and also for the introduction. And thank you also, Catherine, for this wonderful talk. I think it's a good start for the symposium. And I hope that my talk or my contribution will nicely build on that. So let me share my screen. So yes, I welcome you to my contribution on how psychedelics could help shape a therapeutic paradigm. With this title, I want to point towards the fact that we are living in a world with a variety of coexisting paradigms. And I think that psychedelics could be a tool to integrate different paradigms in the context of psychedelic-assisted therapy. But why do we even need psychotherapy? We need it because stress-related mood disorders such as depression, burnout, anxiety, addiction, PTSD are a leading cause of disability worldwide. They are a huge burden for the individual human being and on a collective and economic level. It is a situation with diseased individuals within diseased structures. The problem is that the therapeutic effects of currently available antidepressants often yield unsatisfactory clinical effects, and they often have very severe side effects. So in the last years, along with the so-called psychedelic renaissance, high hopes are put in psychedelics to heal the before mentioned problems and the challenges we are facing. The New York Times even writes that psychedelics will reshape psychiatry. We will have a psychedelic revolution. And in this talk, I do want to question this a little bit. So one limitation I see is that psychiatry is currently based on a biomedical paradigm. Consequently, we're often investigating and understanding psychedelic therapy within this paradigm. It builds on the philosophical assumptions of the Renaissance time, which are materialism and specificity. It's therefore a reductionist perspective. For medicine and therapy, this leads to the following assumptions. So we assume there is a very specific disease or disorder which we can describe and categorize. And we also assume there's a rational, preferably biological explanation. So for each distinct disease, there is a specific therapeutic procedure consistent with the explanation of the disease. Psychological phenomena are explained accordingly. So the biomedical paradigm, I think, is certainly legit for the understanding and treatment of certain diseases. And it's also legit for the understanding of how psychedelics work in the body, in the brain, at the synapses. But it has limits when you're dealing with more complex systems, such as human beings, the human psyche, humans within social and cultural contexts. And the biomedical paradigm can also not fully explain why the same psychedelic substance is helpful for the treatment of various psychiatric disorders. It can also not fully explain why patients report a variety of profound experiences with sometimes sustainably transforming effects. And it can also not fully explain why sometimes a single dose of the substance can have long-lasting effects, much longer than the substance itself remains in the body. Oh. So Therefore, psychedelics do not work like the usual substitution-based pharmacotherapy, which we know from the biomedical psychiatry. I think thinking in regenerative structures and processes will help us to use the potential of psychedelics as tools for effective and sustainable psychotherapy within a broader context. Now, what could the term regenerative mean for psychotherapy? To get a better understanding, we will look at some examples. Regenerative medicine, for example, focuses on developing and applying new treatments to heal the body and restore lost, damaged, or defected functions. It assumes that the human body has the natural ability to heal itself. Regenerative buildings are integrated into the natural environment. They're designed to improve the damaged surroundings. And the regenerative design process promotes the relationship between the build and the natural environment. In regenerative economy and ecology, structures are understood in a way that biodiversity can be established and maintained. This also means to keep the capital flowing and to find creative solutions to break out of policy-resistant feedback loops. Ultimately, to find homeostasis and equilibrium. We can apply these principles to inner worlds as well. So psychological rigidity and rumination keep energy out of the neuropsychological system. Therapy would then help to the energy to flow again. And psychological monoculture is vulnerable. Therapy would help to find creative ways to foster a rich psychological ecosystem and to flourish, to find equilibrium and homeostasis, and ultimately to connect to the self, to others, and to nature. Regeneration needs time. Therapy can never be instant healing, but it must be understood as a process. So we saw that the biomedical paradigm has its legitimation and it's useful to understand the physiological living body. We focus very narrowly, very precisely, but also reductively on the body and the physiological effects. It is an objective third-person perspective. I would argue that we do not have to reject the biomedical paradigm. We don't need actually a paradigm shift, which is often stated in the field of psychedelics. What we need is to complement the biomedical model and embed it within a broader context. We need a paradigm evolution. That requires an awareness of how the historical and cultural zeitgeist shape what we accept as reality. Let's quickly recap what a paradigm is. So a paradigm is a collection of beliefs and concepts, of values and ethical principles held by a group of people. A paradigm is a set of theories, of assumptions and ideas about the nature of reality and knowledge. It therefore contributes to our worldview and creates the framework, the literature, and the research practice from which we operate every day. So psychotherapy had to fit into that biomedical paradigm to be acknowledged within society. Sadly, this led to some sort of rivalry or competition between psychotherapy schools because within the biomedical system, psychotherapy has to prove its specificity, and consequently, the focus has to be on treatment differences. I do say sadly because this is not actually the nature of psychotherapy. So we see that, interestingly, not only psychedelics, but also the psychotherapy itself challenges the biomedical paradigm. In psychotherapy process research, we call it the dodo bird verdict. This is a metaphor inspired by the dodo bird in the novel Alice in Wonderland. So there, the dodo declared that everyone has won and all must have prizes. It has become the metaphor for the claim that all therapies are equivalent in their effects and that it's mostly the common factors rather than the specific differences that make psychotherapy effective. And I think it's a beautiful coincidence that this metaphor of integration we use in psychotherapy research originates from this truly psychedelic novel. So within this contextual model of psychotherapy, some of the common factors concern the patient, the therapist, and most importantly, the therapeutic relationship between them. In the field of psychedelics, we call it set and setting. So first, I want to stress that the proper evaluation of indication for psychedelic-assisted therapy has to be done. And as for every psychotherapy method, self-experience from the therapist would actually be required if we consider psychedelics not as a medication in the biomedical sense, but as an adjunct to psychotherapy. And of course, I'm aware that this is a provocation to the current situation, to the healthcare, and also to the legal system. So Rogers described the therapeutic attitude as authentic, congruent, accepting, and with a sensitive understanding and empathy. This is certainly also true for psychedelic-assisted therapy. Both the patient and the therapist live in their psychosocial context. They have pre-experiences, doubts, and expectations. Expectation has been proposed to be one common factor of psychotherapy. In the context of psychedelics, they must be considered carefully. This is part of the preparation process. An optimistic attitude might positively influence the therapeutic process, whereas exaggerated expectations could lead to frustration and disappointment. For such an experience, a safe environment is necessary. This requires a stable and trustworthy therapeutic relationship. Again, it is a process, and processes need time. Part of the setting is also the use of music and stillness, and the decision for an individual or a group therapy setting. For many patients, group settings might provide a space for correcting experiences of relationship in a broader sense. At the moment, we are analyzing the data of a large-scale survey, which will hopefully give us some more insights into contextual influences. And here, maybe a little side note that I think that group settings might also be an economically regenerative consideration for the healthcare system. Now, I would like to address some of the potential subjective, phenomenal aspects of the psychedelic experience itself and how these states could contribute to the therapeutic process. Let's start with the father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud. He emphasized the importance of pre-verbal early childhood trauma and imprints, and he introduced the unconscious as well as the phenomena of transference and countertransference. Hans Karl Leuner was a pioneer in using psychedelics for psychodynamic therapy. According to Leuner, some of the mechanisms of psychedelic-assisted therapy are regressions to early childhood experiences and enhanced access to pre-conscious contents. And he also said that psychedelic states could intensify transference and that psychedelics open up insights into psychodynamic relationships, bad attitude, defenses, and resistance. In fact, these insights into one's own patterns can be found amongst the common general factors of psychotherapy. Beside the beneficial effects, Leuner also pointed out that there's the risk of a toxic change in consciousness, of neglecting the relationship to everyday life reality. In accordance with Leuner's observations, we found in a study that LSD increased primary process thinking. This is a lower level, automatic, motivation and emotion-driven mode of mental organization. It is therefore very close to the pre-verbal state. Well, in line with that finding, we also found that implicit emotion expression was increased under the influence of psilocybin. Like primary process thinking, implicit emotion expression may reflect a direct, automatic process. These ways of thinking and feeling are characterized by unlikely combinations or events, by sudden shifts or transformations, and contradictory actions, feelings, or thoughts. Interestingly, the integration of seemingly contradictions is often reported as one of the beneficial effects of psychedelics. So, additional to the pre-verbal states of early childhood, Groff observed pre- and perinatal experiences in his patients. These can include experiences of oceanic boundlessness and ego dissolution. Similar phenomena of dissolving ego boundaries and transcendence can also be found or experienced as transpersonal, spiritual, or universal. And these peak mystical states have been found to associate with long-lasting improvement of depressive symptoms. One explanation for that might be that depressive states are often characterized by extreme cognitive and emotional inflexibility and hyper-embodiment. And the pain emerges at the boundaries between the inner and the outer world. As these boundaries dissolve, so do the pain and the suffering. Beyond that, patients report that states of transcendence lead to a feeling of being embedded within a something bigger, beyond the struggles of daily life. This is also something that long-term meditators say about their practice. So that nicely leads to our study, where we combined group meditation and psychedelics. And we found that cognitive bizarreness, which is a measure of dreamlike states, that it was increased under the influence of psilocybin. Leuner wrote that patients rated the overall quality of psychedelic-induced experience as a dreamlike state, as we found here, and that this state included the experience of facilitated access to memories of the past and fantasies about the future. It facilitates flexibility and changing perspectives on a cognitive and emotional level. And again, these dreamlike states allow the resolution and the integration of seemingly contradictions. So this is a picture, the view from the meditation center where the study took place on the Mount Rigi. And I would like to stick to the mountain scenery because Mendel Kellen introduced a wonderful snow mountain metaphor at the Psychedelic Science Conference in 2017. This metaphor nicely explains the vulnerable psychedelic-induced state. I would like to introduce this metaphor with my own pictures. So on this photo, you see my daughter on the skis in the deep snow off the piste, but there are already some ski traces. So when you first learn ski off the piste and there are already some traces, it is by far the easiest to just follow these traces. And it is very difficult to leave the trace you're in. That's also how our brains and psyche work. It's convenient to follow the path that are already there, that we already know. And the more we ski down the hill with our unconscious and our conscious thought patterns in the same traces again and again, the more they form deep trails. It can be a very stuck and inflexible situation, and it can become therapeutically significant when these trails of thought patterns are dysfunctional. So what psychedelics do, they bring a lot of new snow that covers these pre-existing traces. And what happens now is that skis, instead of falling into same old trails, they travel new paths in all sorts of directions, exploring other perceptions, thoughts, emotions, and perspectives. This can be beneficial when dysfunctional patterns can be left behind and pathological priors can be revised and new perspectives and behaviors can be explored. But of course, with this vulnerable state also comes some risks, because without any ski trails, we can easily get lost, and that there are also some problematic destinations, such as spiritual bypassing or hasty life decisions with negative consequences, or rejection of everyday life reality, as Leuner said. There's also the risk of existential crises due to the loss of meaning, or on the other hand, that new insights or meanings turn into dogmatic convictions. Therefore, the contextual understanding is important. Maybe all these aspects of the psychedelic state, the vulnerability, biological or biographical insights, the changes of perspectives and the meditative states, and the transcendence of boundaries, maybe these contribute to these often described feelings of connection to the self, to others, and to nature, to the feeling of acceptance and empathy. At the moment in Milan Scheidegger's team, I'm currently investigating empathy and prosociality in a pharmahuasca intervention study, and I'm curious about the results, which I don't know yet. So the appearance of psychedelics and positive psychology in the Western world, I think, is not a historical coincidence. Many constructs we know from positive psychology, such as flow states, creativity, gratitude, well-being, flourishing, transcendence, also the search for meaning in life. These are all constructs that are also investigated in the context of psychedelics. I think this also challenges our biomedical understanding of health and disease. We might have to rethink the pure symptom reduction as therapy goal and expand our understanding towards what makes life worth living on an individual and on a collective level. So I think that regeneration will not work when we cut a tree and plant a new one. This will not solve the underlying problems. Likewise, I think that psychedelics will not truly reshape psychiatry if we use them only within the limited paradigm. We will have to integrate the biomedical understanding of psychedelic assisted therapy within a contextual psychotherapy framework. This is how I think that psychedelics could potentially become tools for integrated regenerative psychotherapy. Stan Grof, who will, by the way, next Thursday become 90 years old, he once said that psychedelics will be for the study of the mind what the telescope was for astronomy and what the microscope is or was for biology. I understand psychedelics in that sense as tools with the potential to connect, to build bridges, and to integrate different perspectives on an individual and on a collective level. So I would like to end my talk with a quote by Rumi. He said that out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. So with that, I would really like to thank all the people I was working with and I am working with at the moment, and all the people that challenge and support me.
Thanks a lot for this great talk. I really much enjoyed the fresh perspective and also the challenging new ideas. I think it's also really nice because I think a lot of times people in psychedelic science, as you also said, maybe stick to some predetermined ideas. So thanks a lot for these fresh ideas. And we have quite some time for questions, and I will kick off with one question from Gary in the chat. And he asks, what is your view on the even broader perspective, like the integration of substance-assisted psychotherapy in society? Is there a difference in outcome, whether it's legal, like in Switzerland, or if it is conducted in the underground? Does the global ayahuasca project show any hints on that?
What was the legal perspective and the difference? I didn't get that.
So the question is, as I get it, if there is a difference in the outcome of substance-assisted psychotherapy, even if either if it's legal, like in Switzerland, or if it's conducted in the underground.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, we are embedded within a context, and I think if it's legal or not. On the other hand, on the one hand, there's this knowledge that if it's legal, that you're dealing in a illegal context, which certainly is a prior, which certainly shapes what you experience. And I think one of the biggest issues with the illegal underground therapies is that they're somehow sort outside of the accepted like world or society, which I consider a risk for like self-fulfilling circles in a way that it does not get feedback. So there's a psychosocial risk in it.
You mean there's a lacking corrective?
Yeah, so it like increases the in-group versus out-group thinking. So, and it might also increase cognitive dissonance mechanisms that create even or have the potential to create even broader splits.
Yeah, or even increase the psychedelic or the bypassing, what you also said, what you also explained earlier.
And also that if a therapist is working in the underground, he does not have to go to supervision and all these potentially corrective circles.
Yeah. I mean, we've had those sad stories already in the past. But thanks for the answer. I'm going to go to a question asked by Melina. And she asks if you think that meditation practice will become a common practice in the clinical psychotherapy paradigm as it evolves and also combined with psychedelics.
I think mindfulness practices are already integrated in many psychotherapy manuals, such as the DBT or the ACT. Even in meditation or mindfulness practices, I see some potential risks I mentioned for psychedelics. What we found in the study with meditation and psilocybin is that the meditators said that their practice helped them to navigate the psychedelic experience. And on the other hand, that psilocybin helped them to understand or deepen their meditation practice. So I think mindfulness or meditation practice can help to hold what can be experienced in the psychedelic state.
And you also gave psychedelics to long-term meditators, if I understand correctly, for the study at the Rigi Mountain. Is that correct?
Yeah, so Vollenweider, France had 4 retreats with long-term meditators, and I was part of the 3rd and the 4th retreat. And it was long-term meditators in a group meditation setting, and we would take them out in individual settings for some integrative conversations.
Was there a difference in subjective, let's say, in the amplitude of subjective experience of long-term meditators and let's say meditative naive people? So maybe I can imagine, as you said, that maybe some experiences between long-term meditators and the psychedelic experience is similar. So maybe I can imagine that long-term meditators rather say, oh yeah, that was nice, but I already know this kind of space that the psychedelics take you to.
Maybe one thing that could be observed, that the potentially negative experiences such as anxiety or negative loss of control, we did not have that as much as others studies might have that, because psilocybin can also heavily induce difficult states, and we didn't really have that much. And what I found most interesting was that the placebo effects were really high, or the meditation effect. So compared to studies in a lab setting, the no psilocybin condition also rated high on these measures.
Interesting. Okay. Next question. I'm just going to go blindly. I haven't read them yet, but I'm just going to go for a question by Azena. Thank you for this interesting presentation. What do you think the influence of therapists' first-hand experiences with psychedelics on psychedelic-assisted therapy outcomes is? Sorry.
Like in psychotherapy, when you go to a psychotherapy training, you do have to do self-experience in that psychotherapy method you're trained in. And I think that's a difficult question because the legal system does not allow legal self-experience. And on the other hand, it would actually be important. I mean, I think there are other ways where you can get self-experience and an understanding of other states. So maybe the direct psychedelic-induced experience is not necessary. But what is really necessary is an openness for whatever the patient experiences. And I think self-experience can help this openness.
Yeah, and maybe also reaching back to our previous talk, which opened the question about the best practice for an antidepressive action of psychedelics. There's also a question by Eva. If you think what the ideal psychotherapy model is for using a psychedelic experience integrated into that.
Like how psychotherapy model, which school again?
Yeah, if there's a particular model that would fit that model the best.
I think it's integrated. I think really it's not about the specificity, it's about the common factors, it's about the relationship, it's about the attitude of the therapist. Of course, it's also about specific factors like the phenomenology of the experience and how you deal with it. I think ACT and other third wave schools or models have been proposed to be very helpful. But stepping back from that, I really think it's not about the school, because also in like historically there was psychoanalysis, but then the humanistic wave and a systemic understanding act as a like a third wave therapy. So I think it needs to be a fit between the therapist and the patient, and of course every therapist has to find its school where he feels comfortable with, and that's basically the fundament to people. Yeah. So it's not so much about which exactly. I think some might help, like some that include meditation, or of course some techniques or metaphors that's valuable. It's more about the relationship.
And a question also from myself, maybe because I don't really see another question here. I think you were alluding to the transition from substitution-based therapy to this transformative psychotherapy model. What would you think are the steps to actually get them really into their practice and into society? Because you said, in your opinion, it's more like a psychedelic evolution rather than revolution. But I think if you look basically outside the bubble of people who are involved there, it's still quite frowned upon. So what would you think would be the best steps to get this into real life, so to say?
Yeah, I was talking about the paradigm evolution because that kind of goes hand in hand. I think what's being done at the moment, really doing clinical trials and really also critically investigate if what we claim or what we think or what our open label trials show, if this is really true or if it really helps and how it really helps. So we need studies, of course, which will legitimate these practices. We need discussion and an open discourse. And then it's really also about the legal system. So in Switzerland, you can legally do psychedelic assisted therapy outside of studies. So I really trust an evolutionary process if you're open for discourse.
Okay, thanks. Maybe one last one, because there might be people interested in also ongoing studies. And there's a question by Rudolf, and he asked if the EEG studies by Franz Vollenweiler are still ongoing, or maybe if not, if there's some other studies planned where people might participate.
I think I can't say too much about that now. I mean, that one project was finished, and I don't know about the future.
Okay. Okay, then I think we leave it like that. Thanks a lot for your talk, and good luck for your ongoing studies. I think now it's time to hand over. So we're closing the first keynote block now, and I think I'm just gonna hand over to Melina, who's gonna be the moderator for our first student presentation block.